When asked to speak, I realized too late that the topic that I'd chosen was a little too pretentious, that the idea of 20 minutes delivering something on leadership in the 21st century was a bit daunting, and at 8:30 in the morning even more so, but it was too late to do anything about it. So what I'm going to attempt to do is give you at least my own perspective on that topic. And in order to do so, let me first qualify myself. Since I'm going to make some disparaging comments about others who are pre-qualified, you can take all of this with a grain of salt. We at Outward Bound do know something about young people, and it's really the teaching and learning of the subject of leadership for young people that I want to focus on. And what we know after almost 50 years in this country, particularly about the recent period, and what you know as students, parents, teachers, whatever, is this: that on balance, young people today are more sedentary, they are less inclined to take risk, they are frightened of being electronically alone, that is, without access to text messaging, MP3 players, cell phones, and the like. They are learning extraordinary amounts about the complexity of this world through media and on the web. And to some extent, what we do as an organization, which is this experiential education, is being replaced by imaging, by a sense that in surfing into and out of the Grand Canyon, cyberspace-wise, that you've actually experienced it. And those aspects of youth today they lay the groundwork for a real serious challenge in terms of acquainting young people with what leadership really is all about. Now, you may say that that's not me, or that's not Little Rock, or that's not my child, but in fact, having witnessed my children as parents and a lot of parents of young people of Outward Bound kids, what you can equally see are parents who are, let's just say, strapping helmets onto their child's head and walking them to the bus stop every day. Parents who know far too much about child rearing certainly than we did, and that maybe is healthy, and as a consequence are very protective about the experiences that their young people have. And part of that, I think, is due wisely to the much more risky world that we've created for them. But part of it is a real constraint on young people experiencing for themselves the elements of risk that make them stronger, and I'm going to put forward or contribute to a true understanding of what leadership is. That we live in the litigious society that we do, making risk and consequence far more expensive in so many ways, is a feature of our work in Outward Bound, and it's certainly an aspect that contributes to how kids are brought up. So first point, my qualifications, or ours anyway, is that we know something about young people. We are an organization that is about three outcomes and three outcomes only: character development, leadership, and service. And so we pay close attention to what we do and how it relates to that outcome in particular. A second, for real qualifications, we have our own book. It's called Leadership the Outward Bound Way. And I have contributed to this book cover to cover, insofar as the pithy comments on the back, said by others, were drafted by me, and the foreword written by President Carter was also drafted by me. But for those students of public policy out there who know his presidency, I can assure you that he redrafted that several times before it went to final, as I suspect he redrafted most of what came out of his administration while he was president. So the content, however, is expressive of how we view this topic, and I commend it to you, Amazon.com. So what is Outward Bound? We're in the endorphins business. This is an elegant bit of chemistry that heightens one's awareness, both in positive and negative ways. For example, and I apologize for this, the speaker who loses his place in his work and creates this period of silence for himself, begins to have some of those synapses firing differently as a consequence of the flow of endorphins. And the audience, depending on their point of view at the moment, whether they're, I hope this guy gets taken down by his own mistakes, or they weren't paying attention anyway, or whatever, all of a sudden the awareness raises to a higher level of consciousness and you become more acutely aware of what's happening around you. And that's the business that Outward Bound is in. We take young people and adults out of their comfort zone, as Aaron said, and we place them in this state of dissonance with their environment. We want them in a place that's strange to them, and we want them preferably with a group of strangers. We place a challenge in front of them, give them the tools in a safe way to overcome that challenge. We make it essential that everybody get over the mountain. Everybody run the rapid. Everybody get there together. We give them time to reflect. On longer courses, we can go great spans of time when self-reflection occurs before we bring them together. We debrief on the experience, and then we send them out onto their real Outward Bound course, which is the rest of their life. We prefer that that experience take place in the company of a group of young people or adults who are reflective of the society to which they will return them for a very important reason. Now, when the endorphins are at a high level, issues of pigment and gender and socioeconomic status and ethnic background melt away in the face of a challenge, and when the people around you are supporting you in overcoming that challenge, it's a much more powerful experience. We do this work in the wilderness, cities, and schools. We serve more than 30,000 young people and adults every year in the wilderness, another 40,000 in schools. We are, when most people don't know this about us, we are the largest school reform agency in the country. We have 160 public schools around the country whose curricula are being redesigned more in the form of an Outward Bound course, intending to put on the board higher test scores for those who are most disadvantaged, and character development and leadership schools demonstrating that the two go hand in glove. They're not separate, and you don't achieve one without the other. We will serve almost 2,000 veterans returning from Afghanistan and Iraq this year in courses that are specially designed to help them re-enter their other life, to adjust to the prospect out of combat of the life with their family and of their job, or of finding a job in this kind of an economy. So we are fairly broad in the work that we do, and we seek to accomplish these outcomes in all those contexts. And we're here in Little Rock, by the way, by invitation. We're deep into the work of exploring whether Little Rock needs what we can deliver, whether we can be of use in Little Rock to the young people and adults here with a broad range of programs that we offer, and we've had a couple of very good days. So back to the subject. Let's talk a little bit about leadership, and I'll move fairly quickly through this so that we can get to questions or whatever. The problem that we see in respect to how we teach leadership to young people comes from all the sources that you find it. leaving our own book aside for the moment, which I commend to you, books on leadership, as often as not written by academicians, and Dean, with all due respect, academia is not necessarily the petri dish for leadership qualities that I would point to first. But leadership from these books tends to be, when it's autobiographical, tends to be the story of somebody who might have experienced, let's call it, acute leadership. They had a period of time in their life when they actually rose almost heroically to an occasion, and then write a book that retrofits all the rest of their life to a pattern of leadership which may or may not have existed. In other words, it's for me and for us more a way to write a book than it is to teach people and adults about what the real qualities of leadership are about. And there are a number of good books, and there are lots of good things in them about listening skills and interpersonal skills and all of the attributes of a good leader. But at least so far in our reading, there's nothing much out there that really depicts what leadership, at least in the way that we define it, is about. Then there's leadership a la reality TV or Facebook leadership or tweetership, which is the real-time engagement in this kind of media experience where the modeling of leadership takes the form of big personalities overwhelming other personalities, almost in a sort of a modern Machiavellian way, as if those qualities demonstrated in half-hour segments or in, blog exchanges really represent what leadership is all about. And I want to be mildly amusing about it, but the serious point here is that so much of what kids learn today is being learned through that media, those media, that we should be concerning ourselves with what it is one would conclude from watching Survivor or watching Apprentice or the kind of portrayals that happen in that kind of a media. In schools, arguably, leadership, and this is not new to this generation, but the leaders in high school particularly, now maybe middle school, because kids grow up a lot faster and most of what used to take place in high schools is happening much, much earlier. In schools, it's usually the prettiest or the biggest jock, or in some circumstances the strongest, or in some circumstances the one who's got the best stories about what he was doing, and it's usually a he on the streets when he wasn't in school, or what he's doing in school and nobody's caught him at yet. And that kind of larger-than-life portrayal, which is, as I say, not new in schools, but more of a challenge in these days when we are living in a more violent society, again, delivers a message to kids that too many follow about what constitutes leadership. And, I don't know about your experience, those of you who are up in my age cohort, but, all of the kids that I went to school with who were not jocks and not necessarily the prettiest became phenomenally successful, but also happy in their lives and productive. I mean, it's really nerds in ascendancy after you leave high school and college. And, the people I know who were great athletes in high school 20 years later are still living on the sports field, and it's the ones who went for, board scores instead of scoreboards that are really, I think, making their way in life. And that's something that you don't see in schools today, and we should be worried about that. Just two more quick topics that I won't dwell on. Sitting in the halls of, I think, perhaps the most extraordinary politician this country has created, I would say that politics as a profession is a real challenge to depicting leadership qualities in the way that we would have it demonstrated to our kids. And here I'm really talking more broadly about the pressure on politicians to be somebody that they're not, and to maintain their authenticity into and through elections and into and through office in ways that I think were more possible 40 years ago than they are now. I had the privilege of working for 2 presidents and have observed others in public life who were dramatically different in this way, in the way that they exhibited leadership. Just say, the names Nixon and Ford would probably resonate with you well as to what those differences might be. But my point here is that if we look to our political leadership for the qualities of leadership, we're going to see men and women very challenged to maintain their own authenticity in the face of the noise and the Klieg lights of the press. And then finally, in business, Aaron mentioned my own pedigree as a business school graduate, and that I did for a long time work and profit from the private sector, but I'm now in the nonprofit space, and it's easy for me to lob grenades at my classmates and others, those greedy capitalist bastards who are ripping you off. But I won't do that. I will say simply that the recent period gives evidence of what has passed for leadership on the way to making obscene amounts of money, which in no way stands as a model for young people in this country. And maybe we're a bit better off in this period, though there are a few ways you could think of that we are, by virtue of the fact that that kind of leadership and that kind of greed in this country is now finding its place well down the ladder, I would hope, and on a permanent basis for modeling purposes. So, what? The concern of my organization and the view that I have about leadership as it's been instructed and is being instructed is that we're politicizing the term, that if politics is the art and science and method, and the dictionary uses the word intrigue of a thing, then the intriguing aspects of leadership, the superficial or nuanced aspects of leadership, are taking youth into a place that could be really damaging to the formation of what we think this country needs, and it's kind of why we're doing what we're doing. So I want to talk really about 6 qualities that we find relevant to our programming for kids and for adults, that we find instructive to both individuals who are seeking at any age to develop those qualities, and to those of you who are teachers of your own children or teachers of students about leadership, because they take the discussion of leadership into I think, a more authentic, a more organic, a more natural place than a lot of the stuff that's out there. When we do what we do with kids, and by 8:30 this morning on a day like today, we probably would be kind of well up the mountain or well down the river. What we do along the way is, we call it sensible self-denial, but it's worse than that. We really take away all of what a young person thinks are the necessities of their life, and we put them into a challenge experience with very little accessible to them. When they go on solo with us on a longer course for as long as 3 days, they are given very little to survive with and expected to use their own means and purposes to do so. And they're out there so long that they go through all the game playing that we all do when we're first alone about keeping busy with stuff, to the point where you run out of that and they are thoroughly alone. They are alone with themselves. And that kind of aloneness, that kind of experience of coming to grips with who you really are when there are no distractions to you, is a fundamental element of what we regard as the leadership learning that takes place on a course. Because there's nobody to text. You know, you can't kind of find your way someplace else. It's just you. And there's real power in that. And it's probably, in this society right now, the most frightening aspect of an Outward Bound course is the prospect of being alone. In the course of that work, and in being with the assistance of instructors and with their own teammates, of facilitating that experience, of coming to grips with and getting to know and like who you are by sort of comparing notes with others about their experience, there are certain qualities that emerge that produce, in our experience over 40 years, a better person. One's best self, or the promise of being that person in finding all this capability that you discovered when you were overcoming the challenge, and all this stuff about you that you were afraid to deal with or didn't fully deal with, and bringing it together and applying it in some way in your life. And when we're successful, and we are more often than not, we find the means to channel that energy not only to being successful in what they choose to do. We don't prescribe that they need to do one thing or another with their lives, just to take that experience out into their life and challenge themselves to do what they experienced on the course. That service ethic that is embedded in all of our courses, which says you now have an obligation to make your community a better place, to act in the ways of the Good Samaritan, to assist that person who is less capable than you. When we get the captain of the football team or the superstar basketball player or whatever it is, if we've done our job right, they come off the course with a new appreciation of what leading from the back is about. That it isn't always necessary to be out front. Indeed, the challenge for them is to understand how a kind of servant leadership, how a supporting role is so much more fulfilling than a sort of command and control approach that they're accustomed to on the football field or the basketball court. So I'm giving you some of this stuff to kind of peek under the tent of what we do, and for a particular reason, because I want to illuminate these 6 points that I'm going to share with you and then stop by virtue of how we work. And you can put these under the rubric of natural leadership or authentic leadership or outward bound leadership. That would be good, because I'm trying to get the brand name out there. First, in your own lives and for those you are teaching, make challenge the rule and not the exception. Let me start with my age bracket. There are a whole lot of us who have stopped pushing up against the edges of our own lives. And there are a whole lot of people, my kids, who are in their 30s, who are raising families and who are sort of bound into the narrow niche of, this is my job and I'm fully committed to it and I don't really have time for this other stuff, and yada, yada, yada. At any stage, you guys in red jackets, you're kind of doing this with your lives. This is a new thing for you. I don't think a year ago you might have known or figured that you were going to be in city year, but here you are. Make challenge, new experiences, the rule and not the exception in your life. Second, demand authenticity from your kids. If your parents, the whole acting out, boys will be boys, kind of he'll grow out of it kind of thing, you know, you don't have to be a hard driver to find that an unacceptable way to be with and for your children. It should be unacceptable in the workplace, where authentic, honest exchanges are displaced by the politics of the thing. Let authenticity be a requirement of your relationships with others. Third, be alone. Everybody should have time alone. And alone enough so as to not be lonely. Alone in a way that is without distraction and intended for the purpose of finding yourself and engaging. There's no magic to it. It's not rocket science. You don't have to do anything special. You just have to be alone. Because out of that experience will come some revelations that as an adult you lost sight of, and as a kid will be a remarkable experience for you. Just discovering that you really don't have to text all your friends all the time is kind of new. Do drafts. And this is a little tricky, but not really. We've become a society where, thanks to the internet, we can basically fire without kind of proofing or thinking or whatever, and, you know, like missile salvos, and then they come firing back, and you kind of deal with that and you respond again. It's a bit like a conversation, but it's as often as not without even as much thought. And I don't mean to pick on the web, because it's an enormously beneficial tool for us, and social networking is a great tool for Outward Bound to get courses. What I mean by doing drafts is this. We lose some of the craftsmanship of our lives by a kind of ready, fire, aim approach to the things that we do. We lose the importance of improving what we do before we create a finished product in the way that we move as rapidly as we do through life. And so when I say do drafts, I mean consider the craftsmanship of your life. Consider the quality of what you're delivering, and don't hesitate to invest the time in it to make it, whatever the it is, better. Even if it's responding to somebody who's coming across your bow with behavior that is just totally unacceptable. You know, do drafts and kind of work it through and get the pacing deliberate to the quality that you want. That's fourth. Fifth, be outside. There's a long, I got 50 PowerPoint slides on this one if you want that, but I think probably not. The short version is that I think Richard Louv was in town, who wrote Last Child in the Woods, and who coined this term nature deficit disorder, or that deficiency that emerges particularly in young people when they don't go outside. When there's no more swimming holes and playhouses, and your parents don't say, don't come back until nightfall, kind of a exchange with them. And there's some very important dimensions of being in nature and being in the wilderness that, when lost, I think do create enormous deficits for kids. We see kids all over the country. You've got the Ozarks here, and in Denver it's the Front Range, and you know, in Portland, Oregon it's the Cascades. And we've got kids who are smack up against this extraordinary outdoor place. Never been, not interested, nothing to draw them out. They're kind of on the couch watching TV or fooling around with Wii or something. So be outside. Yourselves be outside. Bring your kids outside, even if it's just for the afternoon. And then last, and this goes directly to the service orientation of Outward Bound, but is as much about what authentic leadership is about as any of these other 6 points, and that is this, and it's a great turn of phrase. I'm stealing from Gandhi to say, be the change. Don't kind of hypothesize the change or inflict the change on others, or don't have your service to some other person, place, or thing be external to you. Consider how to be the change that you seek in the world, and live that change, and teach your children to live that change, and teach, as teachers in this institution, teach those students to be a part of the process of active engagement in making this country's public policy governance better. Be the change, and modeling that behavior is especially important. I think that we have a lot of different opinions about what it is that's powerful about the Outward Bound experience. My own personal view is that we believe in failure and success in our work. We think that failing to summit the mountain, or failing or the sort of the detonation of the teamworkiness that happens in day 5 of a course, where everybody's pretending to be getting along and then bang, they don't, and then it comes back together. That failing in this way is the great teacher for us. And learning how to deal with failure, learning how to lean into failure, and this is particularly directed at you guys with the red jackets. how to lean into that failure and when it occurs. And I'm not talking about the sort of the piddling little failures that happen to all of us regularly, but I'm talking about the great, crashing, mind-numbing, I'll never forget this as long as I live kind of failure that everybody gets a crack at about a half dozen times in their life. When you experience that failure, that the trick is to sit in it and to take the aroma of it and to get the feel and the texture of that failure and to draw from it what you will, because that's when those endorphins are really firing, and the sort of tendency to run from that, forget about it, get away from it, you got to push back into that and really engage failure. And I say that to you here as a kind of a sort of a part of a summary, because it's been my own experience in this organization as something of a student of human behavior and organization dynamics, and I'm constantly amused about how our organization behaves and how I can sometimes behave in response. But I find that kind of being a student of that sort, that it's really the big colossal mistakes that get made by me and others that have been the greatest learning experience. And here's why, and here's how it ties back to the subject of the morning. The most important quality of a leader, something that we endeavor to teach, something which I encourage you to learn through your own failures, is humility. Running nonprofits, doing nonprofit work, and I encourage you who are students of this institution to think seriously about heading in that direction, is and should be a humbling experience to you. And it's in the service that the greater importance of the mission versus any one person who's trying to serve it that is really the learning process and the humility that comes with that I think has the potential for making people great leaders. As I say, I'm still just a student of it. I hope the last 30 minutes have shown some of that, but I hope you find some of it helpful to you, and thanks for your attention.
Hello, Patrick Kennedy, Director of Public Program Series. We have time for a few questions. Just raise your hand. We have a couple mics roaming around. Todd, Bob back here. Any questions? Start with you. Here, Allie.
Hi, my name is Allie Turo. I'm a student here at the Clinton School. More and more we live in a society where things like growth and measurement and accountability are kind of the key words, certainly in the profit sector, but also more and more in the nonprofit sector. And so when you're talking about concepts like leadership and character building, how does Outward Bound try to demonstrate growth in those areas? And maybe you could talk about some of the self-reflection activities that participants do when they're doing Outward Bound trips.
Did you all hear that question? Well, I think the first and perhaps most important part of the response is that the science of measurements, of outcomes, and attribute data that we now have due to some very competent academic work in the last 20 years allows us to really put a measuring tool in place to establish that the attributes of character development and leadership have and are emerging both from a course experience of ours or from any experience and longitudinally, if you take the trouble to go back and check. So that's very helpful to us because it helps do us two things. We're a nonprofit. We need to raise a lot of money. We can put data on the board that say, hey, this is what we do. And it also helps us improve what we do insofar as it allows us to go into the sequencing and scaffolding of our own pedagogy and find those elements that work more or less effectively than others. There is no inconsistency, in my view, between the sort of the hard measurement of performance, whether it's academic achievement or whether it's profitability or whether it's whatever it is you want to account for, and the accountabilities that go with that, and character development and leadership. That is to say, it's not so much that we choose to measure and hold people accountable for results, it's much more important how that's done in a non-blaming way, in a way that facilitates and encourages improvement, versus the sort of, way in which I would say Lower Manhattan has demonstrated what growth is all about in the recent period.
Question. Yeah, Judy.
Hi, my name is Judy. I'm also a student here at the Clinton School. Thank you for coming. You touched upon some really interesting things with media and technology, like Twittering and texting and various shows. And as a person who studied media in a previous life, my question is, do you see it as the media's fault for creating sedentary youth who lack leadership? Or is it the youth's fault for how they choose to consume their media and what they consume? And also, if you see any ways to leverage media to promote good, healthy leadership.
It's a great question. My first instinct is to blame the media. I mean, it's so convenient. I mean, it's right out there. There's nobody else involved. What the hell? I think you'd agree, it's much more complicated than that. It's sort of like gun control and guns. I mean, you're sort of saying, okay, it's out there. This is the way the world is right now. We have this capability, and the question is whether we can raise our children and apply media in ways that draw from this capability that which is best, and moderate or bound that which is not helpful to us. And at the end of the day, it's going to be up to parents and young people and adults to take what they will from the information flow coming to them and recognize the damaging and the danger of those aspects of what's coming to them, which are inappropriate. So I'm with Outward Bound. I don't have a silver bullet to that. What I will tell you is that we're holding fast to the idea that when you go off into the wilderness, you're better off without it, with the possible exception of the sat phone that sits in the instructor's bag, which nobody knows is there, which has proven invaluable. There is some thinking, and I think for others this might be a good thing, to demonstrate how that capability, these media, can be feathered into an outdoor experience in ways that make that experience kind of more interesting, GPSing your way as opposed to orienteering, or the ways in which you could sort of report back to your friends that, hey, I'm rappelling down the rock face and it's midnight, what do you think of that? Yeah, I think that's maybe useful. It's just not for us. So I'm not a blamer in that sense. I think it's just the way things are right now, and we have to deal, and we have to deal more effectively than we are right at the moment.
Any more questions?
Hi, I'm Marie Lindquist. I'm glad to have you here. I've been working in leadership for quite a long time and have taken students on outdoor experiences. They're very powerful, but I think it's really hard to translate that back into their everyday life, and I would love to hear more about some of the techniques you use to make that lasting once they get back to their normal life or their everyday life.
Well, I would not hold us out as the model for how to help young people find traction with their changed lives. Meaning that for the first 40 years of our existence, we brought kids in, gave them this great experience, put them on a bus, and they never heard from us again. And for a variety of reasons, most important of which is that this world is just too complex for that, but also because experiences are more likely to be shorter now than they were. We can no longer do that with and for the vast majority of kids that we serve. So we're doing two things predominantly to change that. One is that all of those now 1 million men and women who have taken Outward Bound courses are being welcomed into an alumni association, first for the purpose of connecting them back into the community. As those of you who've been working with us here in Little Rock know, as we've explored the possibility of putting a center into Little Rock, we started with the alumni that we know are here, and we probably have found a fifth of the ones who actually are. And we are, as a part of our presence in cities, saying, you remember that Outward Bound course you had 15 years ago? Well, Habitat for Humanities is running a program, building a house down the street in your neighborhood. We're putting an Outward Bound crew together. We want you to come. So we're reconnecting along the lines of volunteerism and service with our alumni. If I also happen to be, once they're located, fundraising from them, well, that's just a secondary aspect of an alumni initiative. Secondly, and I think with good effect, particularly for kids who are coming to us from a harder life, who have little experience with the outdoors and who are challenged by the things they will return to, we find ourselves far more effective in partnership with others. As an example, we have a partnership with an organization called Summer Search, who we take 250 of their kids, we share the scholarshiping of those kids onto course, and when they come off course, they go into the hands of mentors of the Summer Search program and are supported all the way through high school and into college, demonstrating really extraordinary results through that program. So the second thing is to find a partner who can help us, big brothers, big sisters. We talked to City Year a bit about the possibilities there, but finding partners who can help these kids find traction so that we can focus on what we do well, which is this endorphin thing, and deliver that child into the hands of somebody who can really kind of help move them forward.
Any more questions?
I'll just stand
The recording.
For those of you that don't know me, my name is Brian Day, and I work for the city. And Mr. Reed, we're very, very grateful for you to come down and enjoyed visiting with you. I would like to ask a self-serving question because we are, as the city, hopeful that we can get a center here. And we're glad that you've taken the first step. But would you tell us how this group can get involved locally to help us take the next steps?
Brian is a ringer. Brian is probably chiefly responsible for us being here, and you've all been set up. Well, our work together, both those who are working with us, Bobby East, Brian, a group from this community who are assessing with us together whether it's the right thing for both of us to do, are looking for support. We're looking for the best ways to enter Little Rock so that we're addressing the issues that are of importance here. We want to have a dialogue with the other nonprofits in this town to make clear that we don't want to compete, we want to partner, that we want to help them be better at what they do through the programming that we deliver and to work in that way, because that's our best effect. You all probably have connections in Little Rock that can help us have that conversation, and we have a person, Janae's here, Janae stand up, who is kind of the touchstone for that. Janae is kind of working with town. She's trying to figure out with the advisory committee how we proceed. She may be raising a little money on the side, and checking in with the philanthropic community to see at possibly the worst time ever for new nonprofits to be considering this, to see whether there would be support for our coming here. So I think those are the ways in which you can help. And if you're an alumnus and we don't know about you, go to outwardbound.org/alumni. Make yourselves known. We'll find you. Janae will find you. You'll be absorbed into our work to a point where your day job will be threatened.
Any more questions? Just one more. Time for one. Back there.
Oh, my name is Hillary McKinney, and I'm with City Year. And I just have a question about Outward Bound. How do you choose the kids to go on these trips? And how do they, I mean, what ages are they?
The youngest is 12. The oldest is 95. Usually the choice is theirs. The kids who are motivated to take an Outward Bound course, go to the website, pick a course, sign up. Those who are motivated and can't afford it, apply for scholarship dollars. We support the many, many thousands of kids on courses through the generosity of others, so we try especially to make it easy for for kids to come on course. And there are, in most of the cities in which we work, there are programs or group programs, there are leadership awards based on merit, there are any number of ways to take an Outward Bound course. And just get started. If it's something you want to do, then it's probably a good chance we can make it happen.